Ladies and gentlemen, television was a funny thing in the 1970s. A lot of the white bread stars of the 40s, 50s, and 60s comedy television in the decade of very against type. Now, two of these people you would never expect to be in a horror anthology, but Ozzie and Harriet Nelson really carried this episode. It's called, the Night Gallery episode is called Millikan. Now, according to David Jewell's blog on the series, they're surprisingly well cast as a scientist, and some out there theories that Ozzie's character struggles to prove, and his forgetful wife kind of proves them. Now, third season, episode 5. Teleplay was by Rod Serling, with a story based on The Secret of the Vault by J. Wesley Rosenquist. Directed by John Badham, with Ozzie Nelson as Henry Millikan, Harriet Nelson as Helena Millikan, Dr. Burgess, Don Kiefer as Dr. Coolidge, Margaret Muse as Dr. Steinheim, Lou Brown as Detective Stacy, and Stuart Nisbet as Detective Kimbrough. Now, in this episode, Henry is an aging inventor scientist with a string of failures in his career. Persistently cheerful and optimistic despite the setbacks, he's invited a group of colleagues to witness his latest experiment, which blows up in his face, literally, and also in the faces of his assembled guests. The most vocal and negative of them, and Dr. Burgers, Michael Lerner, obese even in his early 30s, vows never to attend one of Millikan's experiments again. The start of the experiment was delayed a few minutes due to the late arrival and the forgetfulness of Henry's wife, Helena, Ozzie's real-life wife, and real-life and TV wife, Harriet Nelson. After the debacle of an explosion and his guest's abrupt departure, Henry, undeterred, retires to his basement laboratory to work on something. He asks Helena to tidy up and to come for him at 1 a.m. if he hasn't yet come back upstairs. Somehow this Helena cleans up the huge mess by herself, lies down on the sofa, forgets about checking on her husband at 1 a.m. and falls asleep. Some days later, Henry invites his nephew George, who is a physician, to visit and examine Helena, who is a ghastly shade of pale. She is dying, and George cannot get her to respond to treatment, nor can he diagnose the cause of her illness. Surprisingly, Henry seems unconcerned about this grave diagnosis and almost cheerfully asks his nephew how long he thinks she will live. She's been late with everything in her life, he says. I suppose she'll be late with her dying too. George begins to grow suspicious, and when Helena briefly comes to and he speaks with her, she informs him that she willingly took poison at Henry's request. The reason, Henry's going to bring me back to life. Not long after Helena dies, Henry invites George over to observe what he hopes will be his greatest triumph, that of reviving the dead. Henry injects Helena with the serum he's been working on and waits, but Helena's body remains lifeless. Before we arrive, George phoned the police and asked them to meet him at the uncle's house. Utterly dejected, Henry retires to his room, presumably to wait their arrival and his arrest. When the police arrive, George calls for Henry to come down. Getting no response, George climbs the stairs, opens Henry's doors, and his ashen face tells us what occurred off screen. Henry has taken his life. The police leave, and George drowns his sorrows downstairs, devastated at what has occurred. After he swallows down a large glass of brandy, he hears a creaking noise from the basement. Then, footsteps from there as he becomes paralyzed with fear. Suddenly there's a hand on his shoulder. George, where's Henry? Asks the reanimated corpse of Helena, looking even more pallid than she did on her deathbed. Smiling she adds, as usual, I'm late. Now, this episode was a near miss for David Jewell, but I think it was made interesting by the casting of the Nelsons, whose Eisenhower-era bland optimism plays off well against the horror of the story, as well as some fine direction by Night Gallery veteran John Badham. Now, the problem for me, I've never liked Roger Davis as an actor. So he kind of brings down the episode, but maybe sort of like a Beau Bridges or even an early John Ritter. Wouldn't that be great if John Ritter being on the Night Gallery to play these young roles? I think it'd be tremendous. But for what it is, it's a very good plot. And it reads again like a comic book you would see in Ghosts or Unexpected or House of Mystery. It's probably one of the better episodes of Season 3, but that's saying a lot. You're lucky to find a good top 5 in Season 3 because besides this and a few others, especially the Mickey Rooney, locked up episode, that was pretty bizarre. This is, like I said, it's pretty consistent. And seeing the Nelson family, and of course Barry Nelson later on in the Shinin. I can't say the word shining, I'll get sued. It's pretty interesting. Like I said, I give this 2.5 stars out of 4. So if you like what we're doing here with our Night Gallery podcasts, they never end, because midnight never ends. Let us know again with a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Have a good one. Bye.